are no simple answers to this because there are no simple questions in this. This whole business does not give itself to sound bites, but it does need a much deeper debate than most of us have been willing to have so far.
Douglas Murray and the geopolitical debates are the best combo for all the enthusiasts out there. Today, we will be watching him debate against a Muslim activist on the global refugee crisis. Well, as the topic is hot, so is the debate, and it will raise the heat in the air-conditioned hall. But first, let's hear him and his opening arguments.
Them is that there are so many utopian dreams that occur. People dream that you could live in a borderless world on one hand. Other people pretend you could just stop anyone coming. These are impossible dreams, but somewhere in the middle of them is something we need to aim for. And
That's a good start, but what's next? Well, he established a base for his further claims and arguments. He also has his typical humor where he says, "It is too easy to say, I'm a good person, you're a Nazi." Such subtle humor sounds good and keeps a balance with the blunt facts that he shares. Later on, he talks about the two virtues, and they are such good points to have a discussion.
There are two virtues in this whole debate that are in serious competition, not just between people, but within all of us. The first virtue, I would say, is the virtue of mercy, the desire to be merciful to our fellow human beings who are suffering. And we all feel that. Everybody should feel.
He has given good points to talk about. He showed how humans should react to the events that are occurring around us, and we should feel the same pain as others, as they are the same as us humans, and we should feel and share each other's pain. But he isn't stopped with that only. He provides a second point too. It talks about justice for the people who are migrating from their homelands to foreign lands due to several reasons, but not only for them, but also for the people who are living in the countries where these immigrants are fleeing to.
Feel that. But there is also another virtue here, the virtue of justice. And that's not just justice for people fleeing countries, but justice for people in the countries that they are fleeing to. And we can't ignore those two parts. We need to recognize that's what's going on here. This is why it's so difficult, and the debate goes down the middle of.
With this, he showed both points of view of humans. He tries to show the reality of life, that we have to be sympathetic towards the people who are experiencing adverse conditions in their homelands and are forced to leave their homes due to this. But he also talks about the justice of the people of the countries that these immigrants are fleeing to. Both are true to reality. Let's hear him completely and have a serious discussion about the 6 examples that he is going to provide to the audience to think upon.
So let me give you just 6 examples of things we need to think about much more deeply than we have. The first is this. I would suggest it is very obvious that the developing world cannot move to the developed world. So what do we do? Who can come? That's one part of that question. And the second part, which is much harder, who can't?
He initiates a debate. He wants to have a serious discussion on the topic that we have not given much thought about: who can come and who cannot. It is a serious question, as we just simply can't answer it. The second point will have the utmost importance, as it conveys one of the major points in the debate. He talks about the people who are migrating from war-torn countries, and also about the people coming from underdeveloping sub-Saharan and African countries.
Secondly, what are the differences between people fleeing for their lives from a war zone and people fleeing serious, severe economic deprivation in, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa?
He talks about the differences between these two. He posits that we have to work out a criteria to decide whom to give access to the lands, to whom we should give the asylum claims. What's coming next will also provoke debate among people, as there are discussions in which we are not able to reach any conclusions because of the complexities and the nature of the topic. Murray gives a good example. These countries are struggling, and people are so vulnerable that on any day thousands of them can come under the below poverty line population on the global level. So, policies for providing asylums should be made after giving some hard and serious thoughts. He later talks about the people, how some people can adapt and mix with other cultures, but on the other hand, we don't know how much proportion of such persons are there. There are a lot of uncertainties about how people behave, and that's why we have to look for serious discussions over such important topics. Now, let's move ahead a little bit and try to look at another great point put forward by Murray, and this is about things we used to say now and then.
6th question. How do we overcome fatalism? Fatalism you hear everywhere these days, sometimes in the spirit of optimism. This is the world as it is now. People move. This is globalization. Get used to it. Suck it up. Don't complain.
I believe most of you know what fatalism is, but for those who don't, listen up closely. It's like a passive acceptance of the events that occur around oneself, and they don't do anything because they believe the events are inevitable. He asked questions. How do we get used to that? How do we deal with that? And such artificial optimism is absurd. These issues are more than that, and we have to look out for possible solutions, where we can have a balance between countries and people. Well, accordingly, he didn't stop there. He went ahead and shared some solutions that, according to him, were good.
But let me give you just 3 answers I would suggest that we could hold on to as the beginning of a set of answers to this. The first is, hold a very clear line between people fleeing for their lives from war zones and people fleeing economic deprivation. Find and hold to a very
Well, fair enough. It is important to have a clear-cut division which can differentiate between the 2 types of migrants, and it is necessary to provide aid to them accordingly.
Predict with absolute certainty that you will continue to erode public sympathy with people who need the sympathy the most, because these things will be rubbed together and elided. So I would suggest, first of all, find that and hold on to it pretty.
We should appreciate his views on this one, as he puts it in the best way possible. He wants to make sure that people should know the differences between the people from the war-torn zones and the people from economic deprivation. It will help to distinguish people and their needs accordingly.
I would suggest find a broad level of agreement, and there is a lot of this internationally now, that the best way to cope with the most serious situations is to keep people roughly in the area of the country for which they fled. It's much easier to look after them there. It's much easier to get international aid.
Now, he makes a very legitimate point about the economic productivity of the refugees, as if it gets ignored, then these people will become a burden to the guft of those countries they flee to. Well, he also provides the example of his country about how they are dealing with the situation, and Britain certainly did well in this area and have provided migrants with better opportunities and freedom than they had in their homelands.
Aid there. My own country, Great Britain, is, I think, the 2nd largest donor of international aid within the regions of Syria. That should, I think, be one of the models for this, that we make sure that we don't have this idea that some people have that you disperse X percentage there and X percentage there and put these people.
Well, what Britain has done is noticeable, and talking about that stuff is necessary to set an example and to show people how you can provide aid to people when they need it the most. Now, he starts with the last point that he wants to cover before his time runs out, and the most important thing is how these immigrants are going to survive, how they earn to provide for their families and stuff.
People there. Thirdly, I would say make sure you increase economic productivity in refugee camps. Make sure people have a hope and a purpose and a work life when they're outside of their country. Look, I'm concluding with this, because otherwise the music will get so loud you won't hear me. There are no simple...
Talking about economic productivity is very important for their survival and to contribute to the economy of the country they are fleeing to. Well, most of you might be thinking, where is the activist and why isn't she speaking? Your wait is over because she makes an entry as she was provoked by Murray.
Murray, thank you very much. A few provocative thoughts, no doubt, that you mentioned there. A few jumped at me, such as when you said the developing world cannot move to the developed world. You seem to conveniently forget that the developed world moved to the developing world without asking permission.
No, I don't.
Said that,
I don't.
It seems to...
Whoa, that's a fiery start. She jumped on him with disagreements, but what would he say? But what this lady has said is true, that people are moving from one place to another, and no one can just restrict the other person from moving until or unless the person is a criminal or something. But will Murray get the chance to speak? Well, let's see to it.
To me as well, that this is a particularly Western-centric viewpoint, and a misleading one at that, because you know as well as I do, and the figures show it, 85% of the world's refugees, in fact, settle in neighboring countries in the Middle East,
Sure.
in Africa and Asia. They do.
So, he can't make his point due to the bombardment of facts and figures used by the Muslim lady, but we want to hear from him about this. She told him about the percentage of people who migrated to nearby areas rather than moving to Europe to seek asylum.
You'd make a big mistake if you think I hadn't heard of colonialism.
You don't seem to address it in any
I'd
way.
also suggest, by the way, that I don't know how long we're going to go on about colonialism for. I'm happy to do it as long as you like, but let
don't
me
you
just...
have to be factful, though?
His subtle sarcasm and humor make his every debate very much interesting, and this befitting example is just the cherry on the top. He can be very harsh, as we have seen him many times in debates, but here, his cool and calm behavior is just killing the moderator who gets provoked every time he talks about something that she doesn't like. But what happens next is so unreal.
3.5 million refugees. Look at Lebanon and Jordan per capita.
What
the
I'm
countries that have
suggesting
the
to you
most. In
is-
fact, in Lebanon, you've got 1 in every 4 person living in that country is
Absolutely.
a Syrian refugee.
Absolutely.
So to
What-
suggest they're not doing very much is just being
She's intervening continuously. That looks kind of funny, but it isn't good. But the points she has made are true, and this is what Murray has suggested, but she took it the other way. But now, he should provide a reply to this lady that he isn't misleading and prove his point.
misleading,
Believe
being
me,
dishonest.
believe me, I'm not being misleading. And I said from the outset that I agree with the point that most refugees remain in the area. And I said that I think that that's a good idea. I'm suggesting to you that I think it's better that people, for instance, fleeing Syria, end up in the countries around Syria in order to be able to return to their country than putting them in
But they
Norway.
will return. You are suggesting that they don't want to return. Who, in their right
I'm not
mind, if
suggesting
they
they
had
don't
the
want to
option,
return. When did I
and
say
we will
that?
hear from a refugee
And now it is heating as we like. It's getting so interesting, and now we are looking for the answers to the questions she raised. She is dominating Murray by throwing facts and figures and questions continuously towards him, which looks very intimidating.
If they had the option to return, of course they'd want to return.
I didn't say they wouldn't.
They leave everything behind. But you seem to also be oblivious to another important fact that I just want to throw at you before we go to a video clip that I want to show you. It's what about the moral responsibility, though, of Western countries that have contributed to the destabilization?
Well, she also has good points, whether about the meddling in the situation in war-torn countries or the arms sales to them. The West has always been there when there is a warlike situation, and still they help one side and aid the other with arms. But here's what Murray has in his pocket, but will he get the chance to speak, or will he again get intervened by the moderator?
We do answer that. Okay, I'll answer that one frankly. Nobody denies, for instance, the disaster of Iraq. But who are the people who intervened most in
It isn't
Syria?
just
Hang
Iraq.
on. Let me answer it. Who intervened most in Syria? It wasn't America. It wasn't Britain. It's Iran, Russia. It's, among others, countries, including the one we're in and others
You're
around the
deflecting. But
Gulf.
before
I like how this debate is going, like the audience, who is also enjoying this, but it is rude, guys, as she is not letting Murray speak facts, and those facts involve her country or religion. He was right talking about the involvement of other countries rather than his in the Syrian war, but she can't let him speak.
So do you want to
money
take some
at it, aren't you?
responsibility for that? Do
I
you
think-
want to
I
take
think-
more
I think
refugees
blame
here
can-
in Qatar?
certainly
Do you
can
want to
go
take
around.
more in the Gulf?
no one
Right.
is immune to any sort of criticism.
well,
but we're talking
I'm
about
glad to hear
the
it.
Western countries, the British countries, the British
What
countries.
did Britain do in Syria?
We're talking about these governments that you seem to suggest should be immune.
No,
or
when
should
did I
be-
suggest?
This is just amazing and so intimidating. People are not accustomed to this kind of debate when Murray is being dominated by the other speaker. Well, he's not able to say much here, and I don't believe that he is going to survive this debate as if this happens continuously, but one thing is very obvious: it will be a great debate to listen to, which involves a clip.
that you make, and it's an important one, Douglas Murray. You suggest that we need to actually balance between two very important virtues, two important concepts of mercy toward the refugee and justice toward your own citizens. Let's take a quick look at this instance involving refugees.
Well, up next is the clip from a man who is going to drown if the aid doesn't come on time to save 300 people.
Do you send anyone for us? We are the Syrians, about 300.
Sir, I give you the number of Malta authority because you are near Malta.
Hello?
Yes.
About 100 children and 100 women and maybe 100 men.
Now, the questions that are coming toward Murray are damn serious, and how he's going to answer them will decide the outcome of this debate.
A very chilling video, though I don't suggest that you respond on behalf of the Coast Guard, the Italian Coast Guard. But again, it's that same issue of shifting the problem to others. And just for a little bit of context, in fact, this boat, which capsized 5 hours after this call, killing quite a few people on board, we heard
She has asked the right questions about the incidents that Italy was close to the boat rather than Malta, but the authorities did not help them, and a lot of people lost their lives. Well, if you look forward, she seems to be so defensive about all this, but one thing is clear: she will not let him make good and factual points if they are against her country.
We all make sure we don't shift responsibility. There is a responsibility to everyone. That would include state we're standing in now, wouldn't it? It would include all the states in this region. It would include the brother states. It would include the Ummah. It would include everybody. It wouldn't just be the Italians. Now,
Well, I was right, but I want to listen to what Murray has to say without any intervention.
I'm suggesting to you that nobody should be able to absolve themselves from blame. But if you go to Italy now, and I don't know when you were last there, but it is not the case that this is going well in Italy, either for the migrants who are arriving or
He makes a good point here, as the situation has now changed and the natives are more helpful than the authorities, as they are not bound by international rules.
for the Italian population.
Isn't it
You
because
don't
the
see these
resources are not
people
being poured into this? Let's face it, the policies are not there, the resources aren't there.
I
It isn't about
see
the
these
overwhelming
people when they
numbers.
arrive. I follow their stories. It is not the case just that they don't. You know, the local populations in Italy have. I've been to Lampedusa. I've seen the boats coming in.
Well, as he says, he's been to Italy and conditions are good, people care about each other, and this is how they live. But she is intervening as she has done so far. Murray makes a point and can't complete it, but at last he slams a fact that she can't deny to accept.
Very briefly, 3 million people sought asylum in Europe between 2015 and 2016. That's a fraction of the population of Europe, which is 508 million.
And Germany and Sweden took in 3% of the population in 1 year alone.
They did.
So we're not talking about negligible numbers, and
No,
you shouldn't pretend that
not
we are.
across the board, certainly. Douglas Murray, thanks very much.
Thank you.
What are the key takeaways from this? Well, people should see both sides of the coin. No matter if the other side is rusted, it will help us to feel the pain and to look for better alternatives rather than making rash decisions that might cause a loss of life.